Hi everyone, this is Mindy and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do stencil shifting to fill in an entire background. And I'm actually going to show you two different ways you can do this. First, I want to take a look at the products I'll be using. The stamp set is the Big Old Birthday stamp set, and the stencil is the Brush Strokes stencil. Now, I love this stamp set. I know I'm going to be using it a lot, and it has coordinating dies. So there's a lot of great birthday sentiments on here. And then, of course, that amazing brush stroke stencil that I'm excited to be using. Now, these are all part of the Simon Says Stamp newest release, and there's also a few other things in here that I quickly want to show you. So these are some large storage pockets. So I took mine out of my normal one that I have, and I'm going to place my stamp set inside of that, and it has a flap on there that is going to tuck in to that little slit that is there in the back. Now, I like to have my stamp set facing to the front where it's all wide open, and then my stencil in the back, but definitely your preference however you want to put your stamp set in there. I really like these with that flap that tucks down because then it's protecting my stamp set from all the dog hair that's floating around my house right now. The next thing I want to show you is the Stamp and Stencil Mat. Now, this is a collaboration with Brutus Monroe, I believe, and Simon Says Stamp. And this is a sticky grid mat. So it's got the lines on there for your A2 size card fronts and also a stencil. And then there is this 12-inch T-square ruler. Now, both the stencil mat and the T-square ruler I don't use very often, and I'm going to try and use them in my video today, and I'll let you know how that turns out and what I think. And the last thing I want to show you is this corner ink cube holder. So this is a thick silicone. You could see it has spots in there for the mini ink cubes that can go kind of in a corner, whether you have your cardstock in there or maybe you have a stencil mat or even another small glass mat. I think it's really cute. It's very durable. It's not flimsy by any means, but it's not hard like wood. And I do hope to use that in the future. So now on to working on my background using that brush stroke stencil, which I absolutely fell in love with. It was one of the first things I grabbed to play with. So I took a piece of Hammermill cardstock and I placed it on my sticky mat in that kind of outlined area. And then I placed my stencil over the top. Now, the sticky mat is going to hold the stencil down, which I thought was really nice. Like I said, I don't normally use these for ink blending. I'm really attached to my magnetic workstations, but I'm going to give this a shot. Now, the first way I'm going to do this is I have that brushstroke stencil over the top of the cardstock, and I'm going to mask off using Post-it tape. I'm masking off the next brush stroke because I don't want to get ink in there just yet. And I'm going to kind of, I don't want to say fly through, but I did speed up the process a little bit because I do go through a lot of different colors, and you're going to be seeing this twice. So I am going to speed this up just a little bit. I'm also going to be using quite a few colors to get through the rainbow, and I'm going to have all of those specific colors listed down below in the video description and over on my blog. Now, because I wanted to fill in the entire background, I'm going to take my stencil and shift it up a little bit so I have that next brush stroke right underneath that one I just ink blended. Then I'm taking my Post-it tape and I'm blocking off those other two areas that are above and below. And I'm coming in with that kind of reddish color and then a little bit of yellow to create that orange. So for each one, I'm going to have some sort of transition or kind of a highlight area to it. And I'll continue working my way through all of the rainbow colors and have this fill in the entire background. Now, kind of some thoughts on the sticky mat. I think it's great for stamping purposes. Ink blending purposes, like I had mentioned earlier, I'm really kind of attached to my magnetic work surfaces. I struggle with having ink all over the mat. That just might be me being finicky. I like things clean. Staining even kind of bothers me, but that's all personal preference. This does really well holding the cardstock and holding the stencil down. So if you're looking for something that's easy to tuck away, doesn't take up a lot of space, and just really easy to use, I do recommend it. You may also notice that I'm going to go through some Post-it tape on here, and I am totally okay with that because I stock up on Post-it tape. It's one of my most used products other than my tweezers. And what I'm going to suggest is when you are using Post-it tape to kind of block off your other brushstroke areas, you don't want to reuse the same piece too many times because what's going to happen as you're putting that Post-it tape over an inked area, it's picking up that ink that's already there. So if you go to move it to another area, it's going to transfer that ink. So I had worked my way all the way through that stencil. I just sprayed it with some rubbing alcohol and wiped that down carefully, and then brought it back, and I was able to reuse those brush strokes. Now you can flip this, you can turn it in any direction. So there's lots of different designs you can get out of this. So as I'm finishing up here with the last color, I have in some purples, and then I kind of ran out of colors to really use since I ended on purple there. I'm going to bring in that blue and then just put in a little bit of purple there at the bottom. So now I'm carefully removing that stencil, and the way you remove this from your mat is you bend your mat. You kind of have it so it almost folds, and then your cardstock will start to pop up, and you can carefully just peel that off of your mat. So this is one way you can do stencil shifting. That was the initial thought I had, and that was probably the first thing I did when I was using the stencil. But now I'm going to show you another way, and it's probably a lot easier. So I have another piece of white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using Hammermill cardstock. I place the stencil over the top, and this time I have that whole stencil on there, and I'm not going to mask anything off. I'm going to just go through the rainbow of colors and work my way down. And it was actually kind of hard to get some of those colors in there to make it look like it was transitioning instead of just a straight line of blue and a straight line of green, because those areas are kind of small. So I do come back in with some smaller blending brushes, and I'm going to add that detail back in there. So I'll come up to the yellow and I'll add a little bit of orange and kind of work my way in there to help just spice that up a little bit. So here are the two backgrounds I created so far. Now, as I was looking at that one on the right, which you can totally use just as is, I brought the stencil in and I thought, well, why don't I fill in some of those white areas with the stencil and just shift my stencil here? So that is just what I decided I was going to do, except this time I just went back to my good old favorite magnetic workstation, and I'm still going to mask off. I don't know why I decided to mask off these areas. Maybe it was just force of habit. You don't really have to. You can just go through it like I just previously did without doing all the masking again. But really all I did is I lined up all of those open areas of the stencil to the white areas of my card. Now, some of them are going to overlap, which is fine. That's going to actually look really neat in the end result. I just really wanted to have this brushstroke stencil, it's kind of a mouthful, and to go all the way down the front of my card. So here you can see we have a lot of color variation to it. So if you have this stencil or even another stencil that has a design to it and you want to fill in your card more, try just shifting it a little bit. Now that my backgrounds are done, I can work on doing my sentiments. So I have this Oh Happy Day. I love this big, bold sentiment. And this is off of that big old birthday stamp set. And I have a piece of that Hammermill cardstock in here once again. I'm going to ink this up with the Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp. Now, even though I've already used it and conditioned it, there's still a lot of stamp here to transfer ink down onto the cardstock. A lot of space on here. So I am going to stamp it about 3 times to make sure I have really good coverage over all of those letters. Now there's a lot of ink on there, so I'm going to set that off on the side to dry for a minute, and I'm going to work on my smaller sentiment. So I have some black licorice cardstock that I prepped with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm stamping down this smaller sentiment in some white pigment ink. Normally I stamp it twice, but that stamped out really well, so I'm just going to go over, sprinkle on my Alabaster embossing powder, and then melt this with my heat tool. I'll then take my sentiment label die from Simon Says Stamp and line that up over the sentiment, hold it down with Easy C tape, and I'm also going to grab the coordinating die and die cut both of these sentiments out at once. It's kind of hard to have a brush stroke background without adding splatters, so I grabbed some white ink, mixed it with just a little drop of water, and I'm going to flick this all over the background. And then I'm going to take my Wagner heat tool and just kind of go over that to make sure all of those white splatters are dry so I don't smear them. And I'm going to bring in my paper trimmer, and I'm just trimming off about 1/8 of an inch on each side. So it's going to measure 4 by 5 1/4. I also trimmed another piece of white cardstock to that same size, and I'm going to layer it together with a tape runner just to add stability behind my cardstock. And I do want to add dimension to that, so I'm going to use some of the Altenew foam tape. I'll also add some of that foam tape behind my larger sentiment, And then I have my small black foam squares that I'm going to just trim in half and line behind that smaller heat embossed sentiment. I have a side folding card here that I'm going to just hold shut by taking my Easy C tape and rolling that up and placing that in the inside. So that way that stays shut and flat while I attach that front panel. Then I have my large sentiment and my T-square ruler. And I gotta say, so the T-square ruler, it really does work. It's great. I don't think my left hand and right hand can work together like that. It was very awkward feeling for me. I need to try and get used to it because it was really helpful in helping lining up my sentiment to make sure it's straight. And then I added a little bit of liquid glue on top of those foam squares after removing the backing so that I had a little bit of wiggle room. And I used that T-square ruler there once again too. And just finished off this card with some clear quartz sequins from Gina K Designs. And that finishes off my card project for today. So a lot of new things for me that I was trying out today. Some of them I'm probably not going to go back to. Other things I just need to get used to using them, I think. But it's really fun to try out new tools and techniques. One thing I know for sure is I'm going to be using this sentiment stamp set and stencil a lot more. All of my supplies are listed down below in the video description and over on my blog as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again real soon.